afternoon, everybody. Thank you again for joining us at Magnifying Your Impact. And this afternoon, I've got a real privilege because I'm interviewing a great friend of mine and somebody who has inspired me throughout the years, not just with regards to how she inspires us and helps us to make a big difference in the world, but also, you know, this is a person to me who, of all the teachers that I've been lucky enough to be involved in my life, this is a lady who has a unique gift, and I don't feel that she even is going to be able to to graphically describe her gift, but she is the most amazing teacher for children. You know, my wife calls her a child whisperer. She has an ability to be able to recognize what children want when they're suffering, when they're playing, when they're at joy, when they need to develop and grow. She just has this way in which to recognize through energy and through watching their physiology and their focus about how to get the most out of children. And so, you know, over a number of years when my kids were young, Melissa actually started an incredible school that my children were fortunate enough to attend towards the end of their young childhood. And I always feel that it gave my kids a real sense of confidence, but also a real sense of their own unique identity. And I think that's what we all need these days, is to really understand more of who we are and how we can leverage our resources, but also how we can not just fit in, but shine. And I think Melissa's helped me and my wife, Sarah, to understand how to give that to our children. So I'd also love to introduce Melissa at this stage and ask her to introduce herself now and a little bit about her background. So welcome, Melissa. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much for inviting me. Such fun.
It's a pleasure. And so if you could give us a few minutes on your career, your background, what you're passionate about.
So my greatest passion is the education of children, enable them to grow and flourish and be the best version of themselves that they can be from a very early age. My background is that I went to a variety of schools around the world, which was both a good fortune and also was quite challenging. Culturally, I learned a lot about the world. And I also learned a lot about different education systems, but I struggled as a kid. I struggled, I suppose, with everything that you would imagine, moving around, making new friends, different education systems. I was educated in Luxembourg and America and in the UK. And I think that because I was fortunate enough to travel and see the world at a young age, it also grew my desire to want to get to know more about the psychology of people and how we develop. So that led me to take a degree in psychology, which I loved. And I then went on to further my training in understanding the psychotherapeutic techniques that can be learnt to enable people to become, you know, more in touch with who they are. And following that, I went into education. And then I developed and started my own school, which was both a unique and very trying time professionally, because to merge education with the emotional development needs of children is a challenge, in that in an academic environment it's become more the norm, but certainly there's a long way to go to understand that children develop at different times in different ways and need different things because they are unique. So following a long career in education, I then came out of education and decided to really plant myself, sort of, I suppose, with strong roots like an oak tree after everything that I'd learned from education. And I now work with children, teens and families. I coach I support the academic development and the emotional development of the kids that I work with.
Thank you for that, Melissa. And my my sense is that, I'm fascinated between the balance between genetics and environment, and your environment, obviously, when you were young, led you to, as you say, had a passion for children, and culturally you learned and developed a lot. Talk to us more about when you first started having dreams or aspirations, when you were young, and you looked around the world. What was your wish, or what was your goal? What was important to you when you were a kid?
Well, I suppose going back to my early years, what was really important, and I remember a very strong feeling of joy, and looking for joy around me, not happiness, because I guess from a very early age I twigged that happiness was non-permanent, that it was a temporary, based on the fact that, like other kids, I had tantrums, and so I wasn't happy at some stages, right? And you start to see that around you. But I was very interested in joy. What brought that light to people, and that light is specifically that sparks in people's eyes, where you know that they are really connected with something deep inside them that raises them up, that is uplifting. So my early years was definitely about spending my childhood in that imaginative world and role play, and making that joy spark in other people. I think definitely there was that, as well as I just passionate about the world. I was curious, very, very curious as a child. I asked so many questions that my class teacher had to limit me to just 3 questions a day. And I remember feeling so boundaried and so put in a box, and I had so many questions about why I was limited to ask questions, and that actually made me want to ask even more, and so I remember that was a very curious moment in my life of wondering why you couldn't keep delving into things and then ask what happened next, and why and how, and that was a huge part of my childhood, was questioning. And animals, really loving animals. I suppose most little girls and young girls, maybe that's very stereotypical. I know a lot of boys who love animals as well, but very, very I wanted to be around animals. And in terms of what I thought about the world, I knew that I'd traveled. I knew I lived in different countries. I think I was very curious about children from other countries as well. I went to international schools, and so I was always fascinated by their food, their celebrations, what made people who they were and are. Yeah.
And where do you think this curiosity came from, Melissa? Did it, is it genetic? Is it environment? And I've got 2 questions. Where did this curiosity come from? And also, when did you realize, when was the time, and why did you decide it was children that you'd sculpt your career around?
Okay, so curiosity, I think, comes from comes from several places. I think within me, there was a general needing to know, a needing to know that my sense was that there was always more, that, that I never felt that I had enough information. And so there was this real quest for not just knowledge, although I love knowledge and I love learning, but a quest for understanding the moreness of being human.
Right.
I wouldn't have been able to explain that as a kid, but now when I look back, that's certainly what I know was within me. When I first realized that I wanted to work with children and that children would be my passion, I think it really started to develop when I was at university. where I took a psychology degree. And, you know, not only did we have to study animals, but we also had to, you know, really delve into studying people. And, you know, I knew then that the development of the human being really started with those babies. And I wanted to follow that journey. And so that's where the interest in what makes us who we are comes from, and why children.
Nothing's impossible to answer, but it's like, this question for me is, on the tip of all of our tongues as parents or guardians or people that are looking to guide kids, is what is it, for me at least, is what's the difference? What's the magic in our child energy? What's the difference between a child and an adult in the way that we look at the world? What is there a difference, and what is the difference? Because I think I'm still a kid, but I'm an adult. So what do you think the key difference is? Because that will help us understand whether we're helping kids in Africa and Indonesia, in our backyard, in the lounge. That's a question that I think will help us lots in our world, dealing with kids from a professional perspective, but also a personal perspective. What makes a child compared to an adult?
It's a fascinating question, isn't it? Because I think about the in utero experiences that babies have. So, we tend to not focus so much on what happens inside the mama whilst that baby is developing. And yet that environment in there, that we all deem to be so safe and so secure, things can penetrate through from the environment.
Yes.
So, how we come into the world and what we come into the world with is really unique and really, really individual, dependent on that baby's development and that journey from in the creative mode, right?
Yes.
So then when that baby is birthed and then we have this baby that grows into a child. So we could say that baby has a blank slate, but it doesn't. It comes into the world already with a spirit. So what I think sets the children apart from the adults is that they want to live and they want to be in this world, and they want to seize what they can from it. And they have that connection with, spirituality, with their soul. That is definitely what makes us human. We can't forget that part of ourselves, because that's obviously linked to our purpose, isn't it?
Yeah.
Their purpose. They're born with a purpose, and that purpose is joy, and that purpose is life. And I think that adults, we get so entrenched, and somehow it gets taught not out of us, but we can let it go so easily. It's actually something that you have to work on. And I think that children work on joy and work on fun. And you say that you consider yourself to still be a child in many ways. I think that I do. I think it's a youthful energy. I think it's a youthful spirit. I don't want to lose that, because that's what gives me my zest, my get up and go.
Yes.
I don't believe it's innocence, because I don't think that some children are born innocent. I think that they have had very, very difficult developmental periods, but I do think that there is that sense of they just want joy.
Yeah, no, it's a great answer. So I've seen you in a very short space of time with a number of children to support them in a transformational journey towards joy, from feeling that they're stuck, or feeling that they're that the world has become linear for them, and taken away some of their creativity or their imagination through sitting at a desk and told them to just look at a blackboard, or whatever it is or told that they're not good enough at home, or whatever it happens. You have a way of succeeding in your career with children that I think is quite magical. So can you distill that? What are the 2 or 3 things that you do or you create through your energy that allows children very quickly to feel that joy? How can you sum that up?
Well, I think, you know, if I go back to what I was saying before about, you know, the fact that I do think that all children really want to move towards joy, you know, if there is this stuckness, or if there is this belief of I am not enough, then one of the things that I believe that is absolutely necessary is to teach that child how to let go of that belief. And, you know, there are several ways of teaching a child to let go. And, you know, that's the realms of creativity and how we can enable a child to vocalize or draw or reenact or get out in the garden with a hammer and nails and start to build what it is that block, that feeling of not being, you know, enough is like. So letting go and letting them understand that it starts with them, that whatever has happened around them, which is the nurture side, isn't it? To go back to this nature and nurture debate, right? You know, that naturally within them, I believe that they are enough. And I acknowledge their enoughness and I focus on that, rather than whatever it is that they aren't being so successful in, whether that's writing, reading, behavior, sports, whatever that might be that is blocking them. I focus only on acknowledging what they do that is enough. And it might just be a little something, that little spark, that little bit of light. And then I like to find out what their story is when they talk about themselves. Children are great reflectors, and they, you know, tend to know quite a lot more about themselves than we give them credit for. But they also know where they would like to go, what they would like to do, because they dream big. Yes. And that's a huge part of, I suppose, if we could, you know, pop into the next bottle, you know, so there's acknowledgement in the first, and then there's dreaming big in the next, and enabling them to know that they can do anything. There really isn't anything that will stop them. There will be blocks along the way, but there's always a way of removing those. So to dream big, to look at what next. You know, when we're finished with this, what are we going to do next? So that the realm of possibility brings them out of themselves. So we bring them in by acknowledgement, and then we bring them out by dreaming big. And then when they're feeling more settled and more connected with themselves, I think, you know, although it's taken me a while to actually just use a couple of words to explain this, I really do think it is about enabling them to learn who they are through what they're passionate about, what they believe in themselves, because children can have values and beliefs that are different to their parents when within their family. So they have their family ethos and way of being, and then they have their own values and belief systems that is growing up within that within that environment. So I guess I'm working on their nature and their nurture. I'm acknowledging their nature whilst growing the opportunities in the environment for them to really grow and flourish.
And so if we look at you within the school as an example, you know, that you created a team, and I remember once you telling me that you're not recruiting teachers that have necessarily been teachers before, you're recruiting on something else. And I think what was so special when I first walked into this environment, when it didn't, not to say schools are bad or good things, but I walked in and it didn't feel like a school at all to me. It didn't feel like that at all to me. And so you create a really special culture in the adults around you and that work with you. And I'm not saying these guys didn't have it before you came along, but you took a number of different people from different walks of life, different backgrounds, and that weren't traditionally teachers, and taught them how to teach, but teach in a way that they embodied and imbued the values of joy and creativity and imagination. So I've probably just answered the question for you. But I'm interested in what's most when building a team, what's most important because there's so many people out there that hopefully listening to this that want to grow and develop and inspire their culture at work. So give us some advice as to what do you do to create a great culture?
So I think that first of all, the framework within which everybody works is incredibly important to get solid, the infrastructure. So the infrastructure at school, and I think still, with the work that I do today, is very much about understanding that we all work from different intelligences, that we have different strengths, and that we have different areas that we are consistently developing. And so at school, in the education system, one of the reasons that I put a particular multiple intelligence infrastructure in place was to acknowledge the fact that we are all unique. And therefore, from recognizing that my team was full of unique individuals who had their own strengths, their own fortitude, their own areas that they wished to develop, they would then understand that that's what we were mentoring within the children who came into the school. So the children all were unique, and we were, recognizing them as their individual uniqueness, individual side of things. But it's the acknowledgement of those multiple intelligences that were in our framework. The value system, or the values that we had in place, were very strong. So we were it was a value-based framework as well, so a values-based approach. And those three main values have stayed, with me really from a very young age. And, I harp on about them, or I think all of the time with you as well. We have compassion, creativity, and courage. And that's fundamentally what we taught the teachers, is that there were these three values and that we grow them within ourselves. So creativity is the highest power of our cognitive brain, and compassion is the highest power of our heart, or of our energetic spiritual system. And courage comes, from our gut, so that framework of multiple intelligences, that we all have strengths and areas of development, that we have these values that we wished for everybody to grow and develop within themselves, enabled the team to grow together and grow up, as well as to mentor that with the children. Yeah. And in coaching, certainly that's a huge part of what I still, do and work with.
And so talk to me a bit more about how would you describe a multiple intelligence environment? What is that? Give us some more on that.
Well, in a way, it's about creating as many learning opportunities as possible. In a school environment, the 8 intelligences that we certainly wish to grow are a child's linguistic ability, and that means their communication, their ability to write, to spell, to communicate, creatively write through story and tell story. Their logical intelligence is centered around, mathematical processing, problem solving, scientific experimentation. Then there's their ability to connect with art and enhance all of their artistic skills, not just through fine art, not just drawing. We're not talking about just that, but that looking at how they develop their expressive arts, how they see things, how they picture things. When they're read a story, what do they see? How do they see that main character? How did they experience the written word or the spoken word? That's part of a creative intelligence. Music, how to develop music. And again, it's not just about, do you play a musical instrument, and do you play it well, but perhaps you'd quite like to be a DJ and learn how to spit in the decks, Yes. It's understanding that music can be connected with and enhanced in so many ways. some of the greatest DJs, you know, are have incredible music intelligence.
Yeah.
And that links then back to mathematics, where they can, you know, remember the dates of the release of certain albums and all of that kind of things, you know. Music and maths go together hand in hand. You know, several other intelligences. The nature intelligence isn't just about, you know, whether you get out in nature, although of course that's incredibly important for children to spend time outdoors, but it's about, you know, what's happening out on the street, what's happening in your community, you know, what's going on, what are the biggest trends at the moment. So, you know, some kids are far more street smart than others, you know. That's a really important intelligence to look at, you know, because you need to know whether you need to grow that to help more naive, vulnerable children, you know, to become far more aware of their environments, really focused on a huge amount. What another chap called Thomas Armstrong took Gardner's work and made it more accessible to teachers and parents. He called them people smart and self smart. So our interpersonal skills and our intrapersonal skills. So interpersonal skills is what you and I are doing right now, having a really nice chat. And, you know, how we develop those within children is incredibly important, because they go on in life to be part of larger groups and also to become part of teams, you know, and I think that that's an important part of how to move your child forward in this modern world that we live in and how education is evolving. You know, they need to have these interpersonal skills. They need to be able to know how to express themselves and listen, you know, and how to innovate and collaborate with other people. And then, you know, there's the self-smartness, this intrapersonal, which is, you know, you were speaking about that, you know, when we started having our chat. How do I develop myself? You know, is how I develop myself more important than how I develop other people? You know, and I think that really, you know, has a lot of weight within, you know, this, you know, what you're working with, you know, magnifying our impact. It is about my self-smartness. How well do I know myself? What do I want out of being me? And how will that ripple, you know, in whatever way I want it to, out into the world? And you see where you need to develop more, or, you know, what other areas are underdeveloped, and why. Yeah, fascinating.
Wow. So there's a huge amount there. Lots of different intelligences, which is just innumerably valuable for me, because we generalize hugely, right? We think this is intelligence, this is not, and it's not about that at all. From what you've described, I mean, there's a huge amount there. When you zoom out, Melissa, and you look at the planet, because I guess that what you're talking about is you know, internal and external referencing. When you look at the planet right now, and you look at the coronavirus, and you look at you know, so many different challenges of physical and emotional poverty and mental health and climate change and all these different challenges that we have. So what is your biggest challenge at the moment in the world, and how do you feel that we can overcome or at least manage it?
Well, I think the biggest challenge that I'm seeing right now with what is happening, you know, certainly with COVID-19, is that a lot of children and a lot of teenagers are suffering, and that's in our Western developed world, with mental health and well-being issues. And that's a great concern. It's a great concern to me that the children who are our future are so suffering, needlessly, I believe. And I think that we need to spend quite a lot of time looking at what is creating those pressures in children who seek joy. What would life be like if we enabled children in their education to seek joy, rather than to actually have to defend themselves from pressure? You know, that's
Wow.
with me every day, you know. Then I look further afield, and I think about the children who, you know, don't have the materialistic luxuries that my children have. you know, and I wonder, well, what is it that we can do for them? You know, what is it that would actually create such positive change? And I keep coming back to the weights and measures, these scales of inequality. And is inequality something that we have to bear? Is it that this is what our world, you know, is about? How, you know, in this lockdown period, you know, I'm amazed by how much money is being found to help. I think it's both a good thing, and it's a daily source of fascination for me, because if there is this much money, why are we not just tipping the balance slightly and equalizing where we can? You know, health, you know, this intense poverty that exists. You know, and yet you go to these places, you go far more than I, you know, have in my life. And what do you see in their eyes? Okay, it's a overgeneralization, but generally there's a lot of joy from not a lot. So what would happen if abundance came their way in the form of slightly more richness, slightly more you know, help with growing the right crops and all of the farming and all of that side of things, and investing in maybe the intelligences that would create change. So, you know, in that school system that we can create and pop down in other countries, you know, and we work on, you know, really skilling people, those children up, you know, that's what they'll then seed and grow within their own cultures. So what sits with me most at the moment is this sense of why this mental and emotional health suffering amongst our children, and why inequality.
Wow. Yeah. Yes, indeed. There's a lot of answers to that, but no answers, right? I mean, we can dig into our backgrounds and historically, and our revolutions, our industrial revolution and what have you, and all sorts of different things that have created the platform at which we measure and, you know, and pressurize children. What you've said though is really profound for me, because I've never thought of it in those words, that, you know, what would it be like to create that sense of joy as a platform and abundance, rather, and alleviate the pressure in that way, would be, you know, what kind of creativity will we then see in our industries, in our work, in the world around us? Absolutely. So all that you've learned and all that you've experienced so far in your career, are there one or two people that you could highlight that have really inspired you to do this work? And what is it about their work, if there are some people that have inspired you, that have given you this drive? What in particular has inspired you about them?
You know, I'm going to answer this question by saying that I can't just find, you know, one or two. So no. I will speak about the people that I suppose have most come to me. You'll see the Dalai Lama above my left shoulder right here. So a huge source of inspiration about compassion, to remind myself of the loving kindness that I must grow within me and develop within me, which will then, you know, send its rays out into the world. And, you know, that for me, that's that spiritual place of, you know, that is just so powerful. So my work has largely been influenced by a chap called Donald Winnicott, who was a psychotherapist who looked at the importance of play within children. And, you know, certainly my early work with children was very much influenced by this need to acknowledge how important play is. Montessori's work and Rudolf Steiner's work as well have really developed the different facets of the way that I teach. And then obviously we have, you know, Sir Ken Robinson. When I first watched his, you know, TED talk, I remember I sat there and I thought, oh, somebody's actually saying it out loud. Somebody's actually standing up and saying, what are we doing? Why are we putting kids on these factory conveyor belts? What's the point? You know, I loved that. And I was really inspired. And I remember I was just setting up school at that point and thinking to myself, it's amazing, somebody is actually, you know, speaking on a TED talk about this. Awesome. You know, obviously there's the friends and the family side of things, but professionally, there's a couple of people who have really enabled me, you know, and these aren't people who, you know, are you know, well known, but for me they are really well known. You know, they are my supervisor, and you know, and the person who has enabled me to grow most professionally, Gaynus Bertoni, and a lovely lady called Lisa Jennings, who is an amazing spiritual therapist, and has worked with so many people, from Jack Cornfield to Tara Brach, to a lot of people who now work in the realm of self-compassion and radical compassion, I think it is called now. And then there's you, because, you know, one of the things that I think is so important, if we look at my key values, you know, and we go again with creativity and we go with compassion, there's courage. And I've lacked courage in my professional life. And, you know, courage comes from somebody recognizing your vulnerability, but actually also believing in your bravery. And for me, that's what you have enabled me to do since I first met you. You know, you've helped me magnify my bravery and to be courageous. So yeah,
bless
you are.
That's lovely. Bless you. Thank you. You've kind of stopped me in my tracks now.
Sorry.
But I mean, I really appreciate that. That feels great to hear that, Melissa. If you take, you know, all of that you've shared with us, and there's been a huge amount that I've learned and got from it, and what's been going through me a lot is this balance between me as a dad, me helping out with schools and children and the next generation, and how we can instill and help them to find clarity as to their own purpose, their own values, and how they want to take this forward. So if you can answer two questions here just real quick. One is, what's the advice that you would give to people who are working in the area of non-for-profit or profitable education? And then secondly, what's your advice? What's the one piece of advice that you'd give? I know there's lots, but one piece of advice that you give to us as parents.
I think that if you are working with kids today, that it is incredibly important to look at what skills are going to be necessary for the future. So if you're going to talk about magnifying a child's impact on the world, or you're looking at how that unique child can be grown, we need to look at what skills are absolutely necessary for them to take forward. And I'm not sure that schools have their magnifying glass out and are being true detectives for what those skills necessarily are. You know, you and I speak about somebody's work where they talk about future-proofing our children, right?
Yes.
It's a great phrase, you know, that they use there. And I think that schools really need to ask that question, you know, along with the question that I think is incredibly important, which is, you know, not how are you intelligent? You know, which, you know, a lot of schools ask, which is, you know, how intelligent are you? What we want to ask is, we want to reframe that question to, you know, well, how are you intelligent?
Yeah.
That magnifying glass that those schools need to have is about what is going to be most useful for children to take out of education and into the world, that is going to enable them to keep growing and keep developing, and to ripple that effect out there, you know. And in the same way, Craig, I think when you're talking about parents, it's a similar thing, isn't it? You know, that magnifying glass, if we're detectives and we have this magnifying glass and we look around and we're looking for clues, we're looking for, you know, solutions and answers, whatever that is, yeah, we can tell ourselves with our mindset, I'm only going to find negative things. I'm only going to find things that, aren't working out so well. They never tidy their bedroom. They talk back. They never get on with their homework. They don't really know what they're going to do. I'm not sure about their grades. All of that kind of stuff. Those are all of the questions that we can get stuck in this loop asking. And then we can, with our magnifying glass, we're enhancing those all of the time. And so the story becomes, more real, but it isn't real, because that's what we choose to focus on. So yes, we can put that magnifying glass down and say, no, we don't need that one. We'll pick up another one, which is what we want to enhance and what we want to see grown. And we need to learn how to mentor that within ourselves. Are we actually doing what we want to see? So I think that my greatest advice really is something that I spend a lot of time telling myself. Do I do it so much? I do it as much as I can, and that's all I can do. But this to grow and develop myself. So what do I want? How do I want to have that in my life? In order to do that, what skills do I need to develop? Who do I need to have a chat with? How am I feeling? Am I in touch with my feelings? Am I being clear with my language? What thoughts have I got looping around at the moment? And what do I need to do to clarify those? If I continue to work and develop myself and enhance my me-ness, then that's what's magnified. That's what goes out to my children. They learn that developing themselves is absolutely wonderful. And then the people that I work with also learn that as well. So I believe that both places, at home and at school, we need to pick up those magnifying glasses that enable us to actually look at what we want enhanced.
Melissa, Melly, thank you so much. It's been great talking to you, and I'm super conscious that, I so often think this way, is there's so many questions and so much that we can share, but thank you so much. It's been massively valuable and really lovely to speak with you. Thank you very much. And
my pleasure.
Yes, and there's so much value in this for me as a parent, but also from an organizational perspective, and how which to me is really is the work that you've chosen, and everybody that shares the passion of really educating children. It's so important that we focus on their joy and their abundance and their creativity and their imagination, rather than just a grade. So thank you so much. Lovely to talk to you.
My pleasure.
Lots of love. Thank you.